What's up, everyone? Welcome into another edition of our NBA DFS DraftKings Picks videos, this time for Friday, January 28th. I'm your host, Justin Bales, joined by Spike, who is back again. We have a bigger 11-game slate after only 2 games last night, which is why there was not a podcast. Just not that much to go over for 2 games, especially with major news like LeBron being out happening at like 5 p.m. So that literally changed the entire slate. Before we get into everything, how are you doing, Spike?
I'm doing great, man. I'm excited to get into a normal slate after this 2-game charade of late night.
Yeah, pretty crazy. Actually, just got news literally right now that Anthony Davis, after going crazy against Philadelphia last night, is doubtful to play tonight. Could have projected it. I mean, that's not really something that is surprising, or I don't think it should be surprising to anyone. But they did just confirm it right now. So that is some of the injury news that I'll be going over. Prior to getting to that, if you enjoy this video, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. You can subscribe to the channel. If you want to turn on notifications, click the little bell. You'll never miss a video that we post. Outside of that, drop any comments that you have below. Spike and I will try to be in throughout the day to answer them to the best of our abilities. The injury news, there's quite a bit stacked up. So we'll kind of try to go through this relatively quickly, starting with Detroit. Kelly Olynyk, Jeremy Grant, Isaiah Livers all out. Josh Jackson questionable. On the opposite side, it's just Markelle Fultz, who is still out for Orlando. LeBron James is questionable, I'm assuming, because he didn't play last night. He probably plays tonight. The only big thing about his status is I believe Bronny has a game in Philadelphia, which led most people to believe last night that he was going to play against the Sixers and then sit out tonight so he could just stay in Philly and watch Bronny play. I didn't look into that personally myself, but I guess we'll probably know if he travels to Charlotte with the team or not, and we can kind of just figure out at that point relatively early in the day. But as I just mentioned, Anthony Davis is doubtful. On the opposite side, Gordon Hayward, Jalen McDaniels, both out for Charlotte. Kelly Oubre is questionable. Domantas Sabonis up to questionable for Indiana. You still have Malcolm Brogdon out, while Derek Favors is out on the opposite side. Rudy Gobert is out, I believe, 2 more games at least. And then Donovan Mitchell and Trent Forrest are both questionable tonight. Tyus Jones, Kyle Anderson, and Dillon Brooks all still out for Memphis. Marcus Morris is out for the Los Angeles Clippers. Kyle Lowry, Markieff Morris, KZ Okpala, Chris Silva, all out for Miami. Jimmy Butler is questionable. Robert Covington and Dennis Smith Jr. both questionable for Portland. Larry Nance Jr. is out for them as well. Then CJ Ellaby is doubtful to play. You have Trey Murphy, who hasn't really been getting all that many minutes, out for New Orleans. Brandon Ingram and Josh Hart, both questionable. So that's going to be relatively slate-changing news as to whether either one of them play. Jonas Valanciunas and Devontae Graham, both off of the injury report. Keita Bates-Diop still out for the San Antonio Spurs. Patrick Beverly did not play last night. He is questionable to play tonight. It seems like he's probably going to continue to miss time. I think he's been questionable for like 3 or 4 consecutive games and he hasn't played. So would assume he's probably closer to out than he is to in, but really it's just questionable at the moment. Opposite side, DeAndre Ayton, JaVale McGee, and Jay Crowder all out for Phoenix. And then you have Ryan Arcidiacono and Nerlens Noel questionable for the New York Knicks. On the opposite side, Rodney Hood doubtful for Milwaukee, whereas Grayson Allen is back from his 1-game suspension. So he will play in this game. Shifting to position by position, always start at point guard. And Spike, give us your thoughts on this position.
Yeah. So one of my more liked positions of the night. I mean, if you start up top, I really like Ja Morant at 10.3K. He's just playing really good right now. No Dillon Brooks still. Desmond Bane is coming back. I don't think that really affects him too much. And you're going up against a Jazz team that's just really really been on a slump, really depleted with injuries, and they've lost a lot of their recent games. And, I mean, I expect it to continue with them missing a lot of key parts of their team. So, yeah, I mean, Ja's a great play. He just carries that team, and it's a pretty good matchup. It doesn't look that good, like when you're looking at it on the surface, but they're missing some guys that are a key part of their defense. So I really like him there. You go right down below him. DeJounte Murray gets a matchup against the Bulls without Lonzo Ball, so that defense really takes a hit there without him. And I can't. I'm brain farting on his name.
Alex Caruso.
Caruso. And this guy just triple doubles every other game, if not, every 2 games, and then he misses one. So like, he didn't have one last game, I believe, he's due for another one. He's going to carry the weight on that team, like he has been doing most of the season. Right below him is Devin Booker, who gets a really nice matchup against the Timberwolves, who are also going to be on a back-to-back. This dude's just he's a little scoring dependent. He can add periffs, but he's mainly just a scorer, and he just does it so well. And they're going to be without Ayton again, without Crowder again. So I mean, it's not like they're huge parts of the offense, but I expect them to shoulder more of the load. So I mean, that's a really good matchup right there. You go down. LaMelo Ball triple doubled last game. He probably shouldn't have. He got late blowout run that shouldn't have gotten. But anyways, he gets a really good matchup against the Lakers. They're probably going to be without AD. LeBron, as you said, is kind of up in the air, and it's just a really good matchup. 8,400 is still way too cheap for him, so I really like that there. You go down a little further, you get Anthony Simons at 6,800. His price has kind of decreased lately. It's kind of because McCollum has come back, and his role has kind of gone down a little bit. I don't want to say it's gone, because it's not gone, but 6,800 against a Rockets team that gives up the most fantasy points to point guards in the league. It's just a really good matchup. Nazir Little's going to miss the rest of the year, and they're still depleted with other injuries too. So he's going to play a lot of minutes, and he's pretty much a point per minute guy. So I really like that there. On the other side of that, Kevin Porter Jr. at 6,400, I think, is a little too cheap. Portland really doesn't have that great of a defense that I'm not worried about it. And he's just a big part of this Houston offense. He's not terrible at defense either. You go down a little bit more. Devontae Graham at 5,200 against the Nuggets. I really like that. Nuggets really aren't too good against guards, and he's kind of cheap, and they're going to be missing a couple pieces tomorrow, I think. They got a couple of guys that are quite questionable that I really don't think are going to play. Going to have to watch that news. But like, if Ingram sits, if Hart sits, it's a pretty good play for 5,200. And then if you really want to punt, James Bouknight has been playing a lot recently, and I really don't understand why, but it's been consistent over the last 2 or 3 games, and he's 3,300, a matchup against the Lakers, who, if they don't have LeBron or AD, this game could very well blow out, and he could see a lot of run with that there. But that's pretty much about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start this off by saying you basically took every single person that I was going to talk about. So here we are.
Yep.
Very quickly, I guess. Yeah, I do think that in terms of game theory of people looking at Utah and being like, that's a defense, they're not nearly as good of a defense throughout the year mainly. And then they also will be without Rudy Gobert. And although Hassan Whiteside has plenty of block potential, he's not really a defensive anchor like Gobert. So John Morant, who attacks the paint, I'm not necessarily sold that it's like this elite matchup or anything, but not overly concerned with it. DeJounte Murray dropped 52 in his last game, and he shot 29% from the field. Kid's just ridiculous, a walking triple-double. LaMelo, also really good spot. If you look at what the Lakers struggle with, it's point guards that can facilitate, rebound, and obviously score. LaMelo can do all of those. So very, very good option at that point. Talked about Anthony Simons, just too cheap. Kevin Porter Jr. right under him. Another guy that's just a little bit too cheap here is Tyler Hero. Gets a plus matchup against the Los Angeles Clippers. Came back in his last game, played 33 minutes. Only took 13 shots, still scored 34 fantasy points. Just with Kyle Lowry out, he's taking on a bigger role. That will continue. So I do think that Tyler Hero is a completely viable option. Devontae Graham, completely agree with. On the opposite side of that game, I think that Monte Morris is fine just because the matchup's really good. Only 4,400. So, I feel like he's in a pretty good spot to pay off the price tag. 100 above him, Malik Monk, especially if LeBron's also out. But Monk should slide into the starting lineup with Anthony Davis out. If LeBron's also out, they're going to need scoring from somewhere, and Monk is a guy that can do that. And then if you want to talk about guys that are just a little bit too cheap, first off, Patrick Beverly, he's questionable. If he plays, 4,300 is a pretty stupid price tag for him. He'll probably be one of the chalkier players on the entire slate. Second, right underneath him, Jaylen Green is 4,100, and he has been bad in terms of fantasy recently. But his last game, he shot 16 times. 25 minutes the game before that, 11 shots. 23 minutes the game before that, 13 shots. When he's on the floor, he's shooting. And if you're going to only have to pay 4,100 for it in a matchup against Portland, if the shot's falling, the upside is 100% there. We've seen him drop a few big fantasy games. And at 4,100, you don't even need him to have this massive game or anything. You just need him to not shoot 10% from the field, really. Final guy. And I don't necessarily love playing him, but at 3,600, I will at least consider it. Killian Hayes, he scored 20 plus in essentially 5 consecutive. I'm not counting the 9 minutes he played against Golden State. But in games with 25 plus minutes, 5 consecutive games where he scored 20 plus fantasy points, and he's only 3,600. So, if he goes out and happens to drop 30 or whatever, which we've seen him do before, I do think that very, very viable option and gets a plus matchup against the Orlando Magic. It's just that Hayes also will go out on the floor and do literally nothing at times. So you can't really trust him. It's just the price tag that I like there. Shifting over to shooting guard, what are you looking at here? Because similar to point guard, I guess guard in the NBA at this point is just absolutely loaded with a ton of plays. So what are you looking at for shooting guard?
Yeah, real quick, I just want to touch on Jaylen Green again. This is someone in the beginning of the year they were talking about, a really strong candidate to be rookie of the year. So when that shot is fallen, like you said, it's lethal. So if you catch him on a good shooting night at that price, you're going to be in for a really good night. Like you said, at shooting guard, like a lot of these point guards are shooting guard eligible. So I like most of them here. Someone else I really like here is CJ McCollum, 7,300 matchup against the Rockets, who just have a Swiss cheese defense. He's been shouldering a lot of the load since he came back, and I think he's back to full strength at this point. It's just a really good matchup with a depleted team. You want to go right underneath him. Norman Powell is 6,100. Could have saved him for small forward, but I'm using him now. That's also a really strong matchup right there. You go right underneath Amir Coffey. I can't believe I'm saying this. Amir Coffey at 5,400. It's a pretty solid play without Marcus Morris there. He's been starting and he's been doing relatively well. Excuse me, for most of the games that he's started. It's not a super ideal matchup against the Heat, but they are missing Lowry, so that defense takes a bit of a hit there. If you go right underneath them, and again, this is assuming that Brandon Ingram doesn't play. He didn't practice yesterday either. But Nickeil Alexander-Walker at 4,400 will be way too cheap if he's ruled out. Even if he's ruled in, I still kind of like that price a little bit. Other than that, you could probably interest me in D'Angelo Russell at 7,800 against the Suns, who just aren't that good at guarding the three-point shot. And I think he's going to have to shoot a lot for them to stick with them in this game. And that's more or less about it.
Yeah, I mean, so first off, I did want a quick touch on Devin Booker. I know you already talked about him at point guard, but 10,000, the price tag's getting up there. The big thing for him, though, is that one, he's a really streaky player and he is on fire right now. So no real reason to avoid it in a good matchup like against Minnesota. But two, with DeAndre 8 now, to a lesser extent, JaVale McGee and even Jay Crowder, but with DeAndre 8 now, Devin Booker becomes much more versatile on the court. He adds a ton more rebounds. The assists don't really matter. That's still more on Chris Paul, but rebounds really skyrocket. I think he had like 12 in his last game. So the potential is there for just massive games like that. And at 10,000, he hasn't priced himself out. He's scored 67 or more in 2 of his last 5. He's playing big minutes. Gets a good matchup against Minnesota, who he dropped almost 50 on earlier in the season. So I do think that Devin Booker is a really good option. I also want to say that I agree with the majority of players that you said. I don't feel the need to really go over them unless I feel really strongly about them. I'm just going to skip over. I do like who you're talking about. At 8,800, Karis LeVert is still in play, I believe. I think that the matchup's solid against Oklahoma City. This is obviously only if Domantas Sabonis is out. If Sabonis is back in, I probably back off of LeVert for the price tag. The guy that kind of goes overlooked, and I think he'll go overlooked specifically with CJ McCollum being just terribly priced at 7,300. McCollum's very obvious. But Cade Cunningham, the disrespect of this kid, specifically in the media, and I know that they pointed it out the other day, but 34, 8, 8, 4, and 2 in his last game. He's the second rookie to ever do that. The first one, I believe they said, was Michael Jordan. He's only the second one ever to do that, and they played the game on TNT and strictly showed Jokic in that game. They didn't show Cunningham hitting that ridiculous step back 3 on him. Nothing. They solely showed Jokic and talked about how he was going to win MVP. And then obviously the one analyst pointed it out, and here we are talking about it now. It's just a ton of disrespect. He scored 50 plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 and now gets a good matchup against Orlando. I mean, if Cade Cunningham wants to make a statement, I feel like this is the night that he's going to make a statement, and obviously has been playing better recently. So really good option there. I think that's more specifically tournaments than cash games. If you want someone like Desmond Bane right under Norman Powell, I would assume that more people play Powell in the matchup, which obviously makes sense to me as well. But Desmond Bane was up around 7,000 prior to missing a few games. He's now 6,100, came back, looked completely fine. Would assume he's completely back in the swing of things now. So just a little bit too cheap there. I do completely agree with Amir Coffey. He looks really good. I don't know. I wasn't really anticipating him to come in and be this dominant player out of college. I thought that he could be like a solid role player, but with a bunch of guys out, he's really taken over and he looks good. In the same game, Luke Kennard at 4,500 is just a little bit too cheap. I think he's completely viable. And then I don't necessarily know if I want to go down any farther. I think if you want to take a shot on some guys, like you can obviously take a shot still on John Conchar. He's going to play 20 to 25 minutes, and he comes with the upside to pop off in that amount of time. If you want to play someone like Doug McDermott, he obviously is a scorer. If his shot's falling, he can easily beat a $3,500 price tag, but he's also guard forward eligible at shooting guard and small forward. So those are kind of the punt options that I would say, but pretty clear that you're going to spend up here most likely, unless I guess spend up at least to the mid range, I guess I would say would be the best way to put that. But moving to small forward, what do you got here?
You know what? it's really not as bad as it usually is. So I just got to say that, it looks a lot better than it normally does. That being said, it still looks bad. At the top, Jaylen. I don't mind either one of the two of Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. I prefer if you're going to use a Celtic, I prefer Jaylen Brown here. I think the matchup's a little better for him, just because he plays more of that shooting guard role, and Atlanta is really not that good against shooting guards. And I think this is going to be a back and forth game. Both teams really don't have good defenses, which makes for really good DFS wise. They're just. I don't really have much more to say about that. I mean, if you're going to take a shot on one of them, I would do Jaylen Brown up at the top. Going down a little bit, Mikel Bridges is 5,700. The price is getting up there a little bit. He gets a good matchup against the Timberwolves. This guy played 45 minutes last game. 45 minutes. He didn't do much with it, but that's the kind of risk that comes with him. Sometimes he can have really good games with a lot of minutes, or really bad games with a lot of minutes. But the minutes are going to be there again. There's no Crowder. There's no McGee. There's no Ayton. So he's going to be forced to kind of be in the game a lot. So I don't mind taking a shot on him there, especially when most people are just going to go to my next option, which is Cam Johnson at 4,700, which is still way too cheap considering all the guys they have out. Right underneath him, you got Terrence Mann at 4K. Again, the matchup's not great against the Heat, but I assume he's going to start again and should see around 25 to 30 minutes. And at that price, if his shot's falling, he's definitely worth it. He's also someone that can contribute in all 5 categories too. So just keep that in mind. And then I was saving this guy for small forward. He's shooting guard eligible too. But Ben Mclemore at 3,500 against Houston. I'm not sure if people are going to be on him or not. I think he's going to be forced to have to play a little bit with Nazir Little being out for the rest of the year now, especially with Ellaby pretty much doubtful. They got to give those minutes somewhere. I think they go to Ben here, and 3,500 is just too cheap if he's going to see 20 to 25 minutes. It's a pretty good value play there. That's more or less about it.
Yeah, I think you outlined basically everyone that I was looking at. So I mean, I completely agree with you. There's not all that much to honestly add at this position. I guess I will say I agree with the Jaylen Brown take. He just gets more shooting guard minutes. I'll take literally any shooting guard against Atlanta if they're going to get minutes, especially one that can score as well as Jaylen Brown. But that being said, Tatum's been red hot recently, so I also have no issues with him. The big thing is it's also a $1,200 difference between the two. So when they generally come with a similar upside, I know Tatum's is a little bit higher, but generally similar upside. I do like the $1,200 in savings there. Outside of that, not all that much I would add. I guess one of the bigger ones would potentially be Franz Wagner. I think that at 5,600 against Detroit, who really struggles against small forwards, completely fine with that. Or if you want to take the shot on someone like Nick Batum. With that said, I just prefer Terrence Mann at 4K. I would rather play Mann than Batum, but I do think he's at least in play. That's about it, though. That's where I'm drawing the line as small forward. It's always a pretty weak position, and I know we have a few really good options tonight, but not super deep, which generally we can predict that to be the case. But moving to power forward, are you interested at Giannis at the top? Because I feel like we haven't really had the ridiculously priced guy at this point that we're really taking the shot on. Like, I think the highest price it was John Morant that we talked about at like slightly above 10. Giannis much closer to 12. Gets a kind of a weird matchup against the New York Knicks. Are you considering him on this slate, or are you just looking to spend down? And who overall are you looking at here?
I'm looking to spend up at somewhere else we haven't talked about yet, so we'll get there.
We all know
I
who we're talking about here.
I have no problems with Giannis here. The Knicks play a little slow paced, so that kind of turns me off a little bit. But I have no real issues with him here. I'm personally probably just not going here. I feel like recently Giannis has been treated like the redheaded stepchild for like studs, like in DFS. I always see him really low owned, and he has just as high of a ceiling as any of these other studs. So if you want to get a little weird, I mean, there's nothing wrong with playing him. I guarantee you he'll be lower owned than like say Joker or Ja or anyone else in that price range. So yeah, I really have no issues there. Other than that, at the top, there really isn't anyone I'm super interested in. If you want to go on the other side of that game, Julius Randle at 9,200 gets a decent matchup against the Bucks. I don't hate it here. I don't love it, but if you're looking to spend up a power forward or get weird, I have no issues with that. You go down about 4K. You got Keldon Johnson at 5,100 against the Bulls. He's kind of just stayed at this price the last couple of games. He hasn't really had any like ceiling games or great games, but it's coming at some point or another, and he's just too cheap. It's actually a pretty good matchup against the Bulls that really aren't that good against the defending the power forward position. So I have no issues there. Underneath him, I have no problem with going back to this well and PJ Washington against the Lakers, especially if they have no LeBron. I don't see them having much need to play Plumlee much at all. I mean, LA doesn't really have any bigs, and they can go small. They're not going to play Dwight Howard for 35 minutes. So PJ Washington should see a lot of run here. Right underneath him on the other side of that game, I actually played him last night, and this is only if LeBron's out. But Stanley Johnson at 3,400 is a little cheap if he's starting. It's actually a decent matchup against the Hornets, who really aren't that good against the power forward position, which is kind of what he plays with LeBron out. And again, that's just kind of a little bit of a punt play. Right at the same price there is Jalen Smith. I told you last time they were going to have to play him, and they did. I think he almost got about 20 minutes.
Yep, 19 minutes in that game.
And I mean, he's a point per minute kind of guy, you know. And if for some odd reason Biyombo gets into foul trouble, they're going to be forced to play him a lot more than 19 minutes. So I know you shouldn't make your roster dependent on that, but if you need to save the salary to get up elsewhere, it's a pretty solid play for that price. But that's more or less about it for me at power forward.
Yeah, no, I agree there. I think one other spend up to consider. Well, I would consider Jimmy Butler. I have no problems. I didn't mention him as small forward. I would consider it. Not my favorite play, but if you want to throw him into tournaments or something, I have no problems with that. Right underneath him, and again, just a tournament option here. DeMar DeRozan gets a really good matchup against San Antonio, who's really pushing the pace and struggles defensively. The big thing when DeMar DeRozan went to the Bulls was the media absolutely torched them for his style of game, which obviously is just taking a ridiculous amount of mid-range shots, which don't get me wrong, the analytics don't like it. Don't love it, but DeMar DeRozan is a really good scorer, and he does what he does well. It's kind of is what it is. But no Lonzo Ball. So DeRozan does come with quite a bit of upside. His price tag's down to 8,500, so he doesn't need the 50 plus fantasy points or anything to hit value. I believe his price tag was up around 10,000. I'm not sure if it actually touched it or not, but it was a few hundred short of 10,000 a few games ago. So I do think at 8,500, DeMar DeRozan is 100% in play against his former team. I generally don't lock into narratives or anything, but I do think that it's a pretty good spot. And I believe it's the first time he's playing San Antonio since leaving there. So little bit of revenge in that type of a situation. Wendell Carter Jr. Comes with plenty of upside. Again, not really a cash game play. I think you basically touched on, more or less where you're going in cash games. Keldon Johnson, I do think, is just ridiculously cheap. Herbert Jones at 4,900, also a player that I think is too cheap. I don't love the matchup necessarily against Denver, but he did drop nearly 40 against them, and he's just a player that's better at home. I think averaging like 3 more fantasy points per game at home, and I think he's playing half a minute less or something on average. So just a better fantasy point per minute player at home that I feel like you can use there. And then as you go down at the bottom, I think I like who you discussed more, but I do feel like we kind of at least have to mention it because it was in the media, it's in the news reports, and with the trade deadline coming up, it makes sense in that situation for Oklahoma City. Kendrick Williams is 3,700. He's now played 25 and 30 minutes in his last 2 games. There are reports that Oklahoma City wants a first-round pick for him, which is ridiculous. But if that's true, they have to start playing him 30 minutes a game and let him show out, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to get 30 minutes out of Kendrick Williams, 3,700 is a price tag that you undoubtedly will be willing to pay. So a lot of speculation in that as to whether they actually want to, because for us, it just feels kind of ridiculous. And we don't honestly know how NBA teams actually value him, but tough to believe anyone values him out of first. I mean, that just seems ridiculous. I know when I said it, you immediately made a face, which is what I did when I read it. But I mean, hey, if they're going to give him 30 minutes, I don't care why they do. I just am going to be happy with the 30 minutes at the price tag. So just something, I guess, to at least consider at this point. But we can move to center where obviously Spike wants to spend up on Nikola Jokic. It's very clear the dude is unstoppable. Actually coming off of quote unquote a bad game where he dropped like 55 fantasy points against Brooklyn. To be fair, they were beating him by 30 in the first quarter or something ridiculous. So Jokic didn't play a lot after that. Brooklyn came back. He ended up still with 35 minutes, but didn't he kind of like bunched his minutes all together. It was really weird. But overall, talk to me about the position.
Yeah, I mean, I consider that a floor game. I was very displeased, but I am more than happy going back to him again. Not worried about the Pelicans whatsoever there. Right underneath him is Nicolet Vushevik. He gets a pretty solid matchup against the Spurs. I mean, his price is kind of up there, man, at 9,600. But I mean, are you really concerned with Jakob Poeltl stopping him? I mean, I'm personally not. Or with Keldon Johnson stopping him? No.
Poeltl doesn't stop anyone. And the other really good thing about Poeltl is that he doesn't leave the basket. He literally just stands under the basket. So your center's always at the rim. And when you look at, who gets all the rebounds against San Antonio, it's literally centers. They're averaging like almost 18 boards a game against them on the season or something. And it's because obviously Poeltl hangs around the basket so much, so it gives them rebounds. It's really, really smart to play rebounding centers against them, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, like you just said, like Vooch is someone who takes a fair amount of threes too. So Poeltl's not going to be going out there to block him. So I really like that matchup right there. You go down a little bit more, and Yusuf Nurkic at 8,000, I think, is not cheap, but his price has come down a little bit in recent games. Gets a really good matchup against the Rockets, who just aren't good against defending the center position. And Nurkic has just been a rebounding machine lately. He's been putting up doubles and doubles like it's his job, which it is, but like he's just been doing it a lot. So I really like him here. You go down about 2K more. Bismack Biyombo 5,800 against the Wolves. His price is getting up there, but he's pretty much locked into 30 minutes with the injuries and protocols right now. And he's pretty much been at a point per minute the last three or four games. So I have no issues right there. Underneath them, Mo Bamba at 5,200 is just way too cheap. The minutes aren't so solidified, I don't think, but we just saw this guy like 3 or 4 games ago drop like almost 60 fantasy points. I believe that game was without Wendell Carter Jr., but the upside is always there, and a matchup against the Pistons doesn't worry me out at all. It should actually be a pretty close game since both teams just really suck. So I have no issues there. If you want to go on the other side of that, Isaiah Stewart at 4,300, if you're looking to save at this position, I like that matchup for some value right there. Other than that, that's probably it for me.
Yeah, loaded position. Agree with literally everyone you said. There's not a single person you said that I was like, even questioning, really. I mean, like, obviously I don't love Isaiah Stewart, but I definitely would at least consider him. Karl Anthony Towns against Phoenix. Obviously, this looks bad on paper, but that's against DeAndre Ayton, which, if Ayton were playing, I wouldn't want to play Towns. But Bismack Biyombo, we really think that Biyombo is going to stick with Karl Anthony Towns? I don't think that's going to happen. 9,500 is a little too cheap. I think he's a really good option. Opposite Nurkic, Christian Wood. If you look at what Portland struggles with, it's scoring centers, and Christian Wood is a very good scoring center. Really like that matchup. I think that both of them at 8,200 and 8K are 100% in play. Bam Adebayo gets the matchup against LAC, which I don't know why I said that. Obviously, the Clippers. I was looking at it on DraftKings, but Los Angeles. They really struggle against centers. Vika Zubac is not going to be able to stick with Adebayo. Anyone else that they bring in is really not going to be able to stick with Adebayo. So I like him at the price tag. That's just more for tournaments. Clint Capella is still on his minutes restriction, which then puts Robert Williams in an interesting spot because when Capella's off the floor, Atlanta is really bad against centers. Obviously, he's probably going to get around 20 minutes against Capella, but outside of that, just really good matchup. And not that he can't perform well in the 20 minutes against Capella. I think it just adds more risk to Robert Williams, who's already a risky option, but comes with more than enough upside for 7,000. Jakob Poeltl and Goga Bitadze, assuming Domantas Sabonis is out. Both of them have been playing well. Bitadze obviously really struggles with fouls, and then they basically just benched a few of their players in their last game. It was really, really weird. He was one of them. But I think he scored 26 fantasy points in like 19 minutes. That's the kind of upside that he comes with. He shot 8 of 12 in that game, and he gets an elite matchup against Oklahoma City. So if Sabonis is out, I probably go back to him again, just hoping that he gets to the 30 minutes, because it's kind of in a similar spot where, like, I played him against New Orleans, and I played him knowing that he was going to play limited minutes because Valanciunas was going to get him into fantasy or into foul trouble.
Yeah.
It was always going to happen. I then played him against Charlotte, not thinking that he was going to get into foul trouble because they didn't really have anyone that could get him into it. And he did get into first half foul trouble, but it was only for like the final 2 or 3 minutes of the half. So it's not like it killed your lineups or anything. And then obviously they came out in the second half, immediately benched him and Chris Duarte, brought them back for like a minute in the fourth quarter or whatever. A whole weird thing where, they benched players where they weren't in a blowout at that point or anything in the third quarter. I don't think that happens again. So I do think that Bitadze is 100% fine. Above that, Jakob Poeltl. He comes with so much upside because of his blocks and steals. He has 2 or more blocks in, I believe, 10 consecutive games, multiple games with 4 blocks over that span. And then obviously comes with double-double upside. His role has kind of grown much larger recently. And obviously that can be a lot of that can be credited to DeJounte Murray, who is getting plenty of assists. I remember watching the Spurs play the other week. It was like between a week and 2 weeks ago. And all they were talking about was how much Poeltl dunks the ball. It's actually ridiculous how many of his points come off of pure dunks. And that's great for his efficiency. It's why he can shoot so high from the field. And when it comes down to it, they're the easiest basket to make, obviously. So you're not really worried about him shooting the ball 15 times and hitting 3 of them like DeJounte Murray at some points, because he's just going to consistently dunk it. The big thing is, you're generally not going to get 15 shots out of Jakob Poeltl. At the same time, he doesn't need it, specifically for the way that he plays, his ability to contribute in each of the 5 categories. So I do think that he is a high upside play on the slate. That's about it. I don't think that you need to go down and save. Like, you talked about Isaiah Stewart. I agree. Steven Adams is getting more minutes. He doesn't have an offensive role, really, so he's definitely risky. Ivica Zubac gets the bad matchup, but has been playing more minutes, and I'm assuming the Clippers are going to need him on the floor to try to slow down Bam. Mason Plumlee at least comes with some upside, and he's been playing decent minutes recently. I don't think this is a great matchup for him, but if Charlotte decides they want to try to go against LA small just with a big lineup, obviously Plumlee's the guy that you use in that situation. The big thing is they all come with a ton of risk, and there's so many elite higher priced options, and at other positions there's better salary relief guys like Cam Johnson and everything. So I don't think that you spend down at center. I think you can play 2 centers, and I think that you probably spend up on both of them, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I personally think Zubac is going to get into foul trouble early against Bam, and we're not going to see a lot of them. We'll probably see more Hartenstein, but that's just speculation. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to do 2 centers, do yourself a favor and spend up on them. I personally like Joker and Bam. That way you're not completely spending up on both of them. You still have some salary to spend up elsewhere too. And I'm sure more value will open up throughout the day where we can jam in more players, but we're just going to have to wait and see for that.
Yeah, the big thing is you don't even have to spend all the way up or anything. Like,
there's no one that's really
like
super high priced. Yeah.
Like, Poeltl is what, 64? Goga Badite, assuming Domantas Sabonis is out, is 30 or 63.
Yep.
They're just mid-range, and they're all elite plays. So that would probably be my strategy at this point. But obviously we record this the night before, so still a lot can change. But that's all we got for you guys. Thank you for watching again. If you enjoy it, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. Drop anything in the comments. We'll try to get there throughout the day to respond to them. Good luck tonight. Hopefully everyone wins.